So today's agenda is to discuss with all of you where we're at in this capital mall design framework process, what we've done so far, and how you can be involved and provide feedback to us moving forward. So the capital mall design framework is a document that we are preparing with the Capital Area Architectural Planning Board in order to provide specific recommendations for physical changes to the Minnesota Capital District, specifically its public realm, planting, streetscapes, security materials, and lighting. These public realm changes are part of a broader set of changes recommended by the Capital Area Planning Board's 2040 Comprehensive Plan, which was recently published. So we've been working at Sasaki and with the Capital Area Architecture and Planning Board, or CAP Board, as it's known, for several months now, and we are about midway through our process. So you see us here in March. We had spent most of our first phase, task one, learning and creating, working with local community members, government agencies, and our own analysis of the site to develop preliminary concepts. We then have taken those concepts, presented them to the CAP board, and gotten preliminary approval from them. We're now in a phase of showing those concepts to the state of Minnesota, to the community, and getting feedback from them through a survey that is now live. This meeting that we're doing today is one of many meetings that we've done over the past couple of months to gather feedback and to better understand this place and how we can improve it. So the engagement that we've been doing has many layers. We have been working statewide through surveys, a website, and youth engagement that will be going out to schools. We have a regional engagement that has included pop-up events in the Twin Cities and other cities throughout Minnesota, like Bemidji, Duluth, Rochester, and Willmar. We're also doing citywide engagement events within St. Paul and working closely with government agencies and local community members in design charrettes and focus groups. So this is some images of those things that we have been doing over the past couple of months. We launched a survey in January, which got over 1,000 responses. That survey is closed, but we have since launched another survey, which you are all encouraged to take as soon as you're done with this virtual town hall. These are some pictures from our community design charrette, which was an opportunity to work directly with community members in the Minnesota History Center, where we were iterating rapidly through different ideas, concepts, and solutions to the challenges that the capital area faces. So this is just a plug to visit the website, to take the survey that is live right now. This is your opportunity to provide in-depth comments about our current design proposals. And also, if you're in any of these locations, we have a full list of events you can also find in this website, and we'll provide links to everyone in the chat. So briefly, the research that we've done so far about the capital area has been divided into these four lenses: an understanding that we need to connect the capital area better to the surrounding city for its users and its visitors. We need to preserve the heritage that it represents, its architectural and design heritage, as well as the stories that maybe aren't told yet. We need to activate it in better ways to make sure that it is lively through a changing seasonal cycle, as well as a day to night or weekday weekend cycle. And we want to grow. That means to add more plants, species, and just encourage a greater diversity in the ecosystem of the capital area. We're also working on a cultural landscape report, which is a document that helps us to understand what are the historic assets of the Capitol Mall that we need to preserve, and making sure that our design proposals are aligned to help preserve those moving forward. So with the research that we've done so far, we've developed a framework report. This really came out of our interactions with the community during the community design charrette that you saw earlier. And we came across three major themes. One is to increase the vitality of the capital area, bring more people there so it feels safer and welcoming, and just has a lot of life and the possibility of creating successful and sustainable business environment in the surrounding area. Inclusivity means making sure that this place is accessible, comfortable, has physical access, as well as clear design message that all Minnesotans are welcome to be here. And diversity, making sure that we're telling stories of all Minnesotans and the diversity of the large and multicultural state, and also telling stories about an ecological diversity, the different ecological zones of Minnesota, and diversifying the ways that people can use this landscape, bringing in not just the government workers, but arts and culture and events of a different type. So together, these three themes we've kind of grouped together into the topic of more welcoming for more Minnesotans. And this is our North Star guiding us through all the decisions that we are making. Are we making this area more welcoming for more Minnesotans? If so, we're on the right track. We've analyzed at 3 different scales, and I'll skip this because some of the proposals will feed into that topic. And we've developed what we're calling 10 bold moves that go from very site-specific targeted interventions in the Capitol Mall or different areas of the outdoor landscape to things that are more affecting the entire capital area, recommendations for how to better connect and unite this district in a way that's really holistic and functional. So now I'm going to walk you through those 10 bold moves. And at the end of each bold move, we'll do a little exercise where we'll ask you to answer a question about this bold move that will pop up on your screen. That feedback will really help us understand what you thought, how are we doing, and at the end, we'll also do a Q&A. So if there's anything that you wanted to cover in those questions that you couldn't, feel free to add those to the Q&A at the end of this session. So one of the observations that we made early on about the Capitol Mall and that we heard from a lot of community members is that it's not very user-friendly. There is a lack of signage at a human scale. There's not a lot of food and beverage options, or really just places to sit, relax, get one's bearings. So we looked at a solution that involves creating a holistic system of user experience elements that really make it welcoming and user-friendly for visitors and the people who currently work here to get around the Capitol campus, to use its outdoor facilities, and really be able to appreciate its historic and educational assets. This is consisting of 3 layers, which we'll talk about here. One is a kind of visitor amenity pavilion or small place where we could have restrooms, a cafe, maybe an ambassador that welcomes people to the Capitol area, helps them get their bearings, and provides them information about the different destinations on the Capitol. Another layer is signage and site amenities. So wayfinding signage, as well as signage that helps you to understand what is the history of this place and what's happening here today. How is the government functioning? What is the significance of Minnesota's capital? And another layer of digital infrastructure, ways to interact with the Capitol Mall through your phone or iPad or signage that changes to reflect changes in season or events, things of that nature. So I'll ask you this first question, which is, which of these visitor experience improvements do you think is the highest priority for near-term implementation in the Capitol Mall? Okay, we'll give everyone about 10 more seconds to answer the question. Okay, great. So it looks like people are really excited about the visitor pavilion idea, as well as a couple people who were interested in the wayfinding signage and interactive and educational signages. That's great. So we'll move on. So another observation that we made about the capital area was that there are a lot of barriers, both physical and perceptual, that are disconnecting it from the surrounding city of St. Paul. So one thing we wanted to ask the community early on was, what areas of the Capitol Mall feel unsafe? And this map that you see on the left describes the areas that people identified the most as being unsafe. And you can see that the thresholds of the Capitol campus are really where people were having that perception. One of the reasons is there's a lot of roads and kind of emptiness that you have to pass through to get to the Capitol campus, and that can feel unwelcoming and unnerving for people. We also heard that the barrier between Capitol campus and downtown St. Paul, I-94, is something that needed improved connections. And in our first survey, 34% of respondents identified that connection as a priority. So the solution that we've developed is to think about a series of nodes surrounding the capital area that are really these entry points into the site where people arrive on transit, by car, by bike, by pedestrian paths, and making sure that those are alive, vital, welcoming, and really send the message that this is a place we want to be proud of and that all Minnesotans are welcome here. So I'll just run through these. So there is the Cedar and Wabasha deck node. So this is a connection across I-94 from downtown St. Paul to the Capitol Mall that would be achieved through a deck over I-94 that leads to the History Theater. This is the Minnesota History Center, which we're envisioning has some welcoming plaza out front that allows people to understand from this point, you can enter into this whole zone of destinations, really high profile visitor destinations, including the cathedral, the history center, and of course, all the Capitol destinations. The Sears lot, which currently is a abandoned Sears building and parking lot, is a potential area for redevelopment. University and Rice is where there's currently an LRT stop. Como and Rice will have a future BRT or bus rapid transit stop. And Robert Street Station is again another LRT stop. So one example of what we can do, this is the University and Rice Mobility Hub, which is where the Rice Street bus route will intersect the University Avenue light rail route. We want to make sure this feels like a lively place. A lot of people will be entering the site at this place, whether they're taking transit by bus or train. And so our proposal is to encourage others to construct new buildings on either side of this intersection to kind of complete it and enclose it, and really bring life through new activities on the ground floor of those buildings, as well as an elevated design treatment to the landscape and paving of this area that really makes it feel like an intentional, welcoming place that people have invested in. And we want people to stay here, to linger, to take their time and enjoy the businesses and parkscapes that it has to offer. So here are some images of what that could look like. Just bringing people out into the space, having businesses along the ground floor that encourage people to use the outdoor space through cafe seating, for example, and also just making it much more comfortable through trees and a nice paving design. So our poll here is, of those nodes that I mentioned, which of these do you think is a priority to revitalize and reconnect the edges of the Capitol campus? We'll give it 10 more seconds. I know it's hard to choose just one. So it looks like Sears Lot redevelopment won in that poll. That's great. That's definitely a great opportunity to bring more businesses, potentially housing, as well as a feeling of safety and connectivity across that connection between the Capitol Mall and the neighborhoods to the west. So a third major observation that we had in our research and conversations with the community was that over time, the tree canopy in the capital area has been eroded. As original trees that were planted in the original design have died off, those have not been replaced at the same rate. So we see large areas that lack shade and tree cover. We can see that as well in a St. Paul context. You can see the capital area here and downtown here. There's really a low level of tree canopy compared to the surrounding city. This was also the top priority that people mentioned in our survey, our first survey. More than half of respondents said this was their top priority for the Capitol Mall. So what we've suggested is to take a look at all the streets at the Capitol Mall, really assess their current level of traffic, and understand if we can reduce the width of the streets and take back that space for pedestrian infrastructure, as well as for tree canopy. So here's an example of what that would look like. This is Rice Street going north-south on the west side of the campus. And right now it has 6 or 5 lanes and very limited tree cover to either side. To reduce the number of lanes, we can still accommodate street parking, the future bus rapid transit, vehicular traffic, and create new space for pedestrians to walk, for cyclists to bike, people to wait for the bus, and trees, critically, to improve the shade and climate comfort of the streetscape. This is another example on John Ireland Boulevard. One very important thing about John Ireland Boulevard is that we know this is a promenade and a primary approach that people use during demonstrations and events, where they start at the St. Paul Cathedral and they march towards the Capitol. So we want to maintain that central viewshed and axis and really make sure that we're framing the Capitol dome at all points along this boulevard. So even as we narrow this road, we're going to really respect that view, have trees to either side that allow that view to read even more framed, so to speak. That creates a lot of new space for pedestrian infrastructure, seating, cycling, and new trees. On the north side of the Capitol, we're investigating the possibility of having a pedestrian bridge that goes over the light rail line. At this point, there isn't any surface crossing at the light rail, so a bridge would be necessary to kind of bridge the gap between the Capitol building and the north side of the Capitol. And this is what that could look like, creating these really vibrant streetscapes that include transit infrastructure, street trees, cycling infrastructure, and the opportunity for food trucks and things like that to pull up into the parking spaces and serve people. So if you're familiar with the Capitol area, you'll know these streets. If not, do your best guess. But excluding Rice Street, which already has funding to do these kinds of streetscape improvements, which of these streets do you think would be a top priority for investment in this kind of right sizing of the street, reducing the traffic lanes, and then adding in street trees, furniture, and pedestrian infrastructure in its place? We'll give it about 10 more seconds. Wonderful. So it looks like John Ireland Boulevard and University Avenue were top choices. I think we would tend to agree. So thank you for that feedback. Next. Another thing that's really important that we've been studying is the accessibility of the mall and its usability for gatherings and events. This is an important place for people to exercise First Amendment rights to civic expression. It's also a place where people come to celebrate and gather for cultural events or festivities of that nature. We want to make sure that we're setting up an environment that's really accessible and functional for events. And right now, the upper mall, as you can see in this map right here, has a slope or a grade that exceeds 5%. And less than 5% is what we would recommend for wheelchair accessibility and flexibility for events. At the same time, we want to make sure that vehicles can't drive onto the lawns. So those two goals together are an opportunity to kind of rethink the topography, sculpt the topography of the upper and lower malls to seamlessly integrate a security feature, a low seat wall on the south side here that you see in blue, and to make sure that we reduce the slope enough that people can use a wheelchair and that people can gather for events without it being too steep. So that's what that would look like. It's very subtle, but you can see this dashed line here is the current slope, and the new slope is this solid line. So we're flattening it out just a little bit, still keeping the landscape character of that kind of monumental approach to the Capitol Dome. But picking up the difference, as we flatten it out, we need to pick up the difference with a small retaining wall right here. And this is what that could look like. I think the Washington Monument example from DC is a really good one, where you see this low wall at the edge. This wall has two purposes. It helps to retain the soil for that sculpting of topography that I just mentioned, but it's also a security feature. It is there to prevent cars from driving onto the lawn. Next thing we'll talk about is the importance of water. And we know that as the land of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota is really culturally tied to its water, and that's central to its identity. So it should be a part of the Capitol experience. We also know that with climate change, summer temperatures are rising and rainfall is becoming heavier and more unpredictable. So we want to look at ways that we could turn that rain into a resource to create more comfort in the hot summers. So there's two ways that we can do this and approach water in the Capitol design framework. One is to create decorative water features like a cascade, interactive jets, or a seasonal pond and skating location that really communicate the symbolic importance of water and are something that can be a seasonal attraction both in summer and winter. The other way that we're thinking about water is in stormwater management. Using the very same streetscape improvements that I was talking about earlier, taking away vehicular lanes and adding in street trees and pedestrian infrastructure becomes an opportunity also to create rain gardens, or gardens that allow us to absorb excess stormwater and prevent it from flowing downstream and causing runoff quality problems for our aquatic ecosystems. That would be paired with underground systems for retaining that stormwater and improving its quality before it flows out of the site. So those rain gardens that I mentioned could look like this in areas further away from the Capitol building where there's the possibility to create a bit more density in vegetation. We could have these kinds of almost temporary streams that accommodate that stormwater. And then rain gardens, again, can be incorporated into the streetscape. Part of this, including street trees and benches, would also include these green strips that allow us to accommodate stormwater in a really beautiful way. Here's some examples of water features. They can be very simple and low maintenance ways of introducing water to the site. They can have a seasonal component with ice skating in the winter. And they can also be incorporated into walls, like I was discussing in the sculpt the topography move, that really become a architectural as well as water feature. So our poll for this is, of those things I just mentioned, what do you think tells the story of Minnesota and water best? Select your favorite. Give it about 10 more seconds. Okay, so it looks like Rain Gardens was our winner with decorative pools and seasonal ice skating following. So related to that conversation is one about the diversity of plantings in the capital area. Right now, we know that about 80% of this area is covered in lawn. And while lawn is great for events and has a lot of flexibility, we think this needs to be complemented with different types of plantings. We also know that, again, summer temperatures are rising, and that's becoming increasingly a problem. So having a variety of plants, including trees and shrubs, can help to cool down this entire area in the summer. What we're proposing here is a gradient of planting strategies that move away from the Capitol Mall, starting at the Capitol building itself with a more manicured and horticultural palette of plantings that really respects the architectural character of the Capitol building and that sense of decorum and civic nature that we want to have at that end of the mall. As you move away from that, you transition into a more natural and less manicured typology of plantings that really references all the great ecosystems of Minnesota, like prairies, woodlands, and glades. So here's some images, inspiration images of that. Again, around the Capitol building itself, we're calling this the civic plinth. So it'd be an area with open lawns and large trees, but critically a framing of the Capitol dome and large areas that are flexible enough for events is really important. As you move away, you can have these kinds of transitional zones that are still mostly lawn, allowing gathering, but around the edges of the lawn and around trees, you can have these drifts of shrubs, grasses, and flowering plants that really add a little bit of interest and diversity to the landscape. The horticultural element that we're talking about here is something that could be these special garden moments that allow us to showcase something very decorative or something very symbolic of Minnesota in a smaller area. And this is an example from Madison in Wisconsin. And then as we move away from the Capitol building, an opportunity to incorporate things that reference Minnesota's native habitats, oak savanna, prairie, and low-mow lawn areas. So our poll here will ask you to look at images of these different typologies and rate them from 0, you don't like them very much, to 5, you like them a lot. And I'm hearing that some people are not seeing the images. Apologies if that's the case for you. Again, in the Q&A, we can accept any additional comments you might have about these issues. We'll give this about 10 more seconds. Okay. It looks like of those that were able to answer, they loved tree shaded lawn, a little more neutral on the horticultural showcase, and low mow lawns, mixed response on oak savanna, and some love, but also some hate for prairie. So it's all good. Thank you for the feedback. Okay, so moving forward, we're looking at this area called Cass Gilbert Park, which is northeast of the Capitol building. And for those who are familiar with it, there is a overlook in the park that is a really great opportunity to get sweeping views of downtown St. Paul and the Capitol building. Unfortunately, this park right now is a little bit underutilized. Other than this amazing overlook, there's not a whole lot to do, and it is surrounded by parking. We also know that one of the biggest users and visitors to the Capitol area are school children. And school trips to the Capitol area are something of a rite of passage, but there isn't a lot of infrastructure in place to support those school trips. We heard from kids that when they visited, they had to eat sitting on the curb. They think it felt like a very old or formal place. There wasn't a whole lot to do that felt family or kid friendly. We want to think about Cass Gilbert as an opportunity to create a more family-friendly destination and a place where kids can come and think about their role in democracy and their future in it. So this is Cass Gilbert Park, and it's northeast of the Capitol building. Right now, all that's really there is this path and this overlook, which is this small circle there, as well as a very large parking lot. We're proposing to reduce that parking lot and make it more intentionally dedicated to bus parking for groups and school groups, and then create the amenities that those school groups and school-aged children are going to need during their visit, or if they just live nearby. So that includes a restroom, food and beverage opportunities, picnic tables to have lunch during a school trip, as well as areas to play and integrate play into an educational experience. This is something that will become an asset, not just for those school trips, but as I said, families in the entire area, and hopefully even become a destination where families in the region want to come here specifically to play and to learn a bit more about the Minnesota Capitol. So here's some more features there. I think one thing to highlight is an idea of having multi-generational play spaces. So young children, older children can come and have different experiences. Here's some inspiration photos of how the picnic area and food and beverage might work, play area involving water, and play features that I think could involve animals or wildlife of Minnesota to also offer an educational experience about Minnesota's ecology. There could be signs that describe ecology as well as history, just an opportunity for families to gather and enjoy themselves. And of course, great views of the surrounding landscapes. So our poll here is an open-ended question. We want to know what is an element you would like to see in Cass Gilbert Park, and we'll take your suggestions and think about if we can integrate them into this design. Okay, about 10 more seconds on that one. Okay, thank you everyone for your feedback. Moving on. One thing that we've heard a lot about and understand is a need to represent Minnesota. This is a symbolic center of the state's government, of its statehood, and we want to make sure that it is representing the entire state in its full cultural and ecological diversity. That means introducing a wider range of plantings, as I've mentioned, that represent all of Minnesota, as well as creating strategies for commemorative works, memorials, statues, and monuments that really symbolize today's culture, as well as respect that of the past. So we're not here to suggest specific commemorative works in our proposal, but we want to give a structure to the way that commemorative works might be added to the Capitol Mall in the future. So we've divided this up into three different zones. The south zone is called history and relevance. So this is an area that currently has a lot of the memorials to soldiers, police officers, and other kind of military or political heroes of the past. And so we're thinking of this place as a place to honor the past. So you move to the center, we want that space to really be dedicated to today's culture and today's ideas. And so have things that could rotate over time to reflect new interests and ideas. And then as you get to the Capitol building itself, we're creating this area we're calling the democracy stage. So this is an area that we think should be free of commemorative works in order to really respect people's rights to come here to express their free speech rights, to demonstrate without having symbols of something they might not agree with, to kind of hamper that freedom of expression. So in short, we really wanted to feel like a neutral space. So this is an example of how that democracy stage could look, similar to the US Capitol, really free of vertical elements or encumbrances, but open for people to gather, both for celebrations and free speech expressions. As you move towards that cultural platform area, opportunities to have rotating art exhibitions, things that are integrated into walls and pavements that could really reflect today's cultural ideas or underrepresented voices. And then in the history and relevance section, we identify there will be a need to add more commemorative works over time. We want to make sure that we set guidelines for those works to be added in a way that respects and works with the landscape. So ideas like what you see on the right, where you have a commemorative memorial that really works with the topography, or down here on the bottom left, something that integrates into the walking experience. So it's really intentionally part of what people are going to walk through anyway, as well as ways to integrate that kind of memorialization and information into pavements or furnishings, like you see on the upper left, sorry. This relates to the idea of a cultural walk. And we're talking about a cultural walk as this kind of horseshoe that goes around the Capitol building in the area that is most visible to the Capitol building. So I'm just going to skip over this and zoom in on that. So what's really exciting about this idea of a cultural walk is creating an experience, a kind of one-stop shop for the visitor to experience all the different seats of Minnesota's government. Its executive branch with the governor, its legislative branch with Senate and House, and the judicial branch at the Judicial Center. And this could really become a heart for expressing Minnesota's ideas today. You could have exhibitions, signs. This is a place where we're interested in incorporating flags of the tribal nations in Minnesota, as well as temporary artworks like that. We can also work within the paving and signage itself to incorporate information about Minnesota's government and provide an educational experience that doesn't really clutter, but becomes an integral part of that walk, as you see in this image. So the question we want to ask about the cultural walk is, what kinds of stories do you think we should tell on this cultural walk? Understanding, of course, there'll be many stories over time, but what are the things you think are missing that we could tell? We'll give this about 10 more seconds. Okay, we'll have to close that there, but if you have more ideas, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A later. So part of this cultural walk is a central feature that we're calling the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard Community Commons. And that is this space that you see in red here. Right now, this is a wide 70-foot road with 6 lanes of traffic. That's very unpleasant for pedestrians to cross. It's all asphalt. It doesn't contribute much to the visual experience and also kind of disconnects the upper mall here from the lower mall here. So that cultural walk that I talked about before would kind of run along this crescent here, and this would be the heart of that cultural walk. We heard from a lot of people in our survey, more than half, that more furniture, benches, picnic tables, places to sit and just enjoy a daily recreational experience is something that's really lacking in the capital area right now. So we want to bring those ideas together to create a heart for the capital area where people can really gather, and it's intentionally designed to support events. So our concept is to reduce the number of vehicular lanes, create a curbless street that discourages pass-through traffic unless people really need to be there, and prioritizes the pedestrian experience and makes it just really porous for pedestrians to move between the upper and lower malls. This is a great opportunity also to have art that's integrated into the pavement, maybe things that the community contributes to as a collaborative project, as well as furnishings and, again, shade trees being really important. I'll just skip through those images and get to this section, which I think is really an effective way of telling this story. So the lower mall is over here on the right, the upper mall is on the left, and this whole paved area, we've reduced the number of vehicular lanes, but still allow traffic to pass through if they need to. We've created a space for the flags of the tribal nations in Minnesota, which you can see here in blue. And then a lot of space for pedestrians, for people to gather, sit in the shade, and to create little beds of plantings that could have symbolic meaning for Minnesota. So with this new community commons, we want to ask you, what kinds of programmings or activities do you think you'd most like to see in this new community space? What would excite you? Oh, I should probably mention you're allowed to select 2. We'll give that about 10 more seconds. Okay, it looks like cultural events were really popular, as well as an interest in food events like Taste of Minnesota and farmers markets. Great. So I've run through those bold ideas and talked about these individual design proposals that we've generated with the community and with our stakeholders at the CAT board and other government agencies. But what's really important is how this all comes together into a single vision for the capital area. And that's what this proposed design framework plan represents. So we don't want to see these projects as separate ideas that don't really relate, but part of a cohesive experience of the Minnesota Capitol Mall and the greater capital area as a really identifiable place with character and meaning. These projects won't happen all at once. And so this framework plan becomes an opportunity to set and share a common vision so that as people pursue individual projects, say a building project at the Sears lot, or an improvement at the light rail station, or the addition of community features or amenities at the gateway, at the thresholds of the site, then we can allow those to all contribute and start adding slowly to reach this vision. So as over time, these things kind of come together and they feel intentional and part of one shared vision. So all this information has gotten us to this point. We still have a couple more months of working on this design framework left. We're here in March. We will be publishing this design framework in June, and then we'll be moving into phase one of implementation. And that phase one project that we're looking at right now is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard Community Commons. We really see that as an opportunity for a catalytic investment that creates a heart to this whole district. And from there, all of our improvements will start to grow and add on to each other. We'll have continued opportunities for feedback. Survey 2 is in the chat. And if you go to the Minnesota Capital Mall Design Framework website, you can see links to the survey as well as information about upcoming events. Right now, we have two things we want you to do. One is to complete a poll that will ask you for demographic information. It's completely anonymous and voluntary. We won't share this. And another is to, in the Q&A, add any questions you might have. We might have time to answer them here live. If we don't, we'll try to take them into consideration. You can put questions as well as just general comments, even if you don't have a specific question you want to ask. I don't see any questions yet. Don't be shy. Feel free to enter anything that's on your mind. We have a raised hand. Unfortunately, we won't allow anyone to speak live in the meeting, but Paul, if you could put your question in the Q&A, that would be great. Okay. See, Paul's question is there any current funding or is CAP board looking for future bonding, etc.? And the answer to that is yes, there is current funding. Legislator has approved $5 million for this first investment, and we're looking at spending that on the improvement that I was calling the Martin Luther King Boulevard Community Commons. Additional funding would have to come from a variety of sources, both legislative, bonding, as well as partnerships with other agencies and potentially private developers, private landowners in the capital perimeter to do things like the Sears lot or those catty corner developments that I was showing at the University and Rice intersection. Okay, so Steve has a great question. Will the proposed plans be presented to the entire state in a media event prior to finalizing plans? It's a great question. We are planning to have a celebration to kind of reveal the draft framework plan. As we continue to get feedback, we will develop this over the next couple of months. I'll go to that timeline. Oops, here it is. And in May, and we haven't set the date yet, but we'll send out emails and make sure that that's announced well. We're going to have a celebration to kind of launch the Capital Minds Mall Design Framework, have a call for final feedback and comments on that. And we'll likely do another survey to get comments on that design framework. Okay. Well, we're at 8 o'clock. I can stay on a couple more minutes if anyone has additional questions. If not, thank you all for attending. Again, I would encourage you to visit the website, take the survey, stay engaged, stay involved. Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your attention this afternoon, and have a wonderful night.